Hello, DefCamp. So I will be here to present an unnerving story, so maybe disturbing to some. So I will say first, viewer discretion is advised. Okay, is it really on? Great. So let me introduce myself a bit. I'm a vulnerability researcher. Basically means finding other people's bugs. And okay, let's keep on because we have little time. Well, before we go into the depth of this talk, I will start with a quote I like really much. It's from Clausewitz, which means war is the continuation of policy with other means. So, in other words, 0 days are related to military applications and therefore related to politics. So why is that? Well, because war is a distant concept to some others here, so we have to go into a bit of it. First, the war is mostly fantasized by certain fictions. First, you may lose a war even you started it. It is apparent given our neighbors here. And in some fictions, war will pay for itself in tax. War may pay for itself magically in fictions. And in fictions, those soldiers on the field, they magically get supplies. But in the real world, you have to use taxes or by other means to pay for food and fuel for your military. And people will die. So before a country goes to war, well, as a Taiwanese, I know that you need some serious discussions. Sorry, the picture was a little bit off. To go to a war. And we have a critical, how do I put it? We have a critical concept behind this research, which is the concept of critical infrastructure. First, there are some certain industries, they were declared as critical infrastructure by the US, which is like 8 industries. They are very important to people's daily lives. And we think that all critical infrastructure needs to work despite in war, because you need those infrastructures to work to provide civil services, and you also need them to provide more GDP and taxes. So, for example, if you have no water, then people cannot drink water. But for military use cases, if the enemy takes over water, they can simply overload your water dam and flood people's houses. And if you take out electricity, apparently nothing works. You cannot give a presentation here, and traffic lights on the road would not work. If you take out bank, you cannot transfer money, so you cannot buy anything. But according to this fabulous research, there is a dependency chart, and it seems like all of the dependencies in the critical infrastructure area points to telecommunications, which is obvious because without telecommunications, that nothing works. You cannot call police, you cannot call fire trucks, you cannot wire money because there's no electricity to run the network. So it is obvious. So our theory is, if you want to cause a great mayhem to your enemies, or if I were to invade any countries, then it will be natural for the enemies to take out telecommunication first. So the problem will be, how do we cause a long-lasting, painful, and hard to recover damage to your enemies, to the telecommunication industry? Well, we have simulated a few scenarios, and we think that attacking network physically will not work because the network can be built resilient, which means most networks can be built with multiple lines. Well, indeed, in the past, there are some countries that made this mistake by not making their network resilient. For example, Georgia has some problems before by a certain grandma digging holes in the ground. And also, we think that directly attacking IX and ISP core would not work because the IX and ISP can be replaced very quickly. So we have a very great theory. What if we take over every modems? Well, every household has them, and they are great in numbers. So we should start to think like, how do we find a stinger, a spark, and fire? So why do we pick the modems as a target? There is a survey, for example, the EU 39 region, which is almost the entire Europe region. According to a survey, it says yes, 108 million fiber subscribers, which means the Europe Freight and region has 108 million fiber optic modems. And two, modems are ISP's assets, because for most ISPs we studied, the modems are provided to you as an ISP's property. You are not able to modify it. And you cannot just replace or defend any modems, because you couldn't just go into Carrefour or any supermarkets to buy one. And this is my most favorite one. The modems models are not fragmented. For example, some IoT and IoT companies, they maybe have 100 models, and you can blame the customers of buying something unsafe. But for modems, you cannot blame the customers, because by blaming the customers, you blame the ISPs, and you cannot do that because ISPs are a part of a critical infrastructure. So, due to this fact, the models of the modems are not fragmented, and you can write one exploit and use that exploit on every modem from the ISP. And we have surveyed most ISPs' infrastructure, and we thought that most ISPs are built like a multiple layer, one-to-many way. So, for example, the ISP gets their data exchange from the IX, and they have an IP core which is full of routers and switches to do those data switching, and they also have accounting inside. And from the IP core, if the ISP wants to provide fiber optic service, they will use an equipment called the OLT. OLT is basically something to turn IP protocol into any XPON protocol, such as GPON. And from the OLT goes to something called splitter. And splitter is something that you will see on the cabinets on the streets, which is basically a prism. It doesn't do anything but a prism. So from one OLT can be many splitters, and from one splitters can be many ONUs, which is modems. And for every subscriber, which is usually every household, will have one modem. And that's it, you will have the user PC on the right side. So the problem here to the ISP is it is a multiple one-to-many infrastructure. So our target under study is actually a major telecommunication provider in Taiwan. And for some background information, that telecom in 2022 said they have maybe 4 million subscribers, hence the title saying that 4 million modems. And it's a great amount because we're a country with maybe 20 million citizens. And this ISP has multiple brands in use, but we pick one of the most significant modem from them, which is made by, you may be able to see here, it says made by Nokia. So we started this modem. And so why we were here? Because apparently we found something. So in this research, we found a way to compromise a particular ISP's infrastructure. And we started by something very little. And we found several new days on the modems. Fortunately, they were fixed today. And we are starting thinking that there are some missing defensive options that should be there, but not there, and it is common around the world. So, in this talk, we're basically talking about a kill chain of the telecom, and we will say how the things went down. And for some legal reasons, to prevent that I will go to jail after the talk, I have to say this. I have to present this page. So I actually got the modem on the 2nd of July. I started studying on 4th of July, and I found the box on the 10th. So I go to the official agency of our country, and they started handling it on the 25th. And in the middle, they have fixed the box. And the bugs are now public. You can actually go to the website and see that the bugs are indeed public. So most of the bugs are fixed, minus one that is declared as won't fix by the vendor. So where should we seek the cinder to light it? If I were an enemy and I want to invade your country, by taking over all of the modems, then this will be my 3 steps. 1, I will try to get and hack one modem. 2, I will try to hack the telecom. And by achieving these 2, we can achieve the target of hacking everyone's modem. So how should we do it? Well, as a human, it is natural to take a look into past literatures to see what our ancients has done. But it seems like our ancients barely talk about breaking the modem from the website, probably because it was scarce and we usually won't hear about it. There are already tons of discussion about breaking the modem from the LAN sites, but we don't want that. We want to break the modems from the WAN sites. However, according to the past literatures, we think that remote manager seems vulnerable. So, for example, there's a wonderful talk at the 44Con. It's talking about breaking TR096 interfaces of the modems. Well, so it seems like we found a target. And by tearing apart multiple modems, we analyzed that common attack surface of most modems. So let me elaborate a bit. In most attack scenarios, either the user PC and the internet can be an attack source. Usually it's the internet, but in some cases, the user PC can become an attack source. And in the middle, we got a modem, which is set on UCP on the site. The first obvious one is the baseband, because the baseband has to convert basically light into copper. So usually it is implemented in a black box. But the problem with a baseband is if the baseband has some bugs or parts in the protocol, then you automatically become a very high level privilege on the modem. Sorry. And we think that most modems around the world, they usually base their operating system on a Linux-based OS and use the Linux kernel for network handling. So, for example, they use the Linux kernel for any kind of routing, exchanging data. The problem with this is if there will be any layer 2 or layer 2 more 0 days in the Linux kernel's network stack, well, you will automatically have an kernel exploit. And for the management part is usually open to the ISP and the user. This is because the ISP sometimes has to connect into your modem to adjust some things, and the user may need to connect into the modem to adjust Wi-Fi. So the management is usually open to the ISP and the user. And for other services, there are some other value-added services. For like Japan, their modems has VoIP on it. For some other countries, maybe they have USB on it, and you can connect the hard drive to the modem to make it become a NAS. So the other services could also become an attack surface. But since we're focusing on the remote management, so we did some digging, and things like ISPs around the world, they split into 2 factions. So some ISPs, they will use a standard to do remote management, which is a standard discussed in the broadband forum called TR069. And another faction is they will build their own management protocols and open that protocol to the ISP. But it seems like most ISPs around the world, they prefer to not using the standard. I do not know why. But in some cases, they will make some mistakes by opening the management protocol to the internet instead to the ISP. Same, I do not know why they would do that mistake, but it seems to be common around the world. So anyway, we try to somehow obtain the hardware of the modem we wanted to study, and we started taking it apart. And I have to say, for most modems, they are not really designed for you to tear it apart. For example, this one is very difficult to open the case. Well, so from this, we gone to list, and please ignore the wires I sorted onto the board. But anyway, if you were not familiar with how to hack a board, well, I have some very detailed information for you, which is component identification. So after some identification, that you can quickly identify which input and output opportunity you have with the board. So for this board, you have a UART board. You can actually locate the points on many boards using the same technique by using a very fast multimeter or a logic analyzer or by guessing. So for this board, when we connect the board to the serial port, you get something like this, saying CFE version whatever. So for this board, now we know that we have multiple input and output methods to interact with the board. One is very apparent, is the web management interface. And two is the serial port that we found earlier on the previous slide. And another ultimate method is to interact with the board with flash readers. Well, but for this board, using flash readers could be a little bit difficult for some reasons that I will not elaborate in this talk because we only get 30 minutes. So, if we were to use serial port for flash extraction, how should we do? For most boards like this, it's like when you turn on the board, it will try to read the bootloader from somewhere, and bootloader boots, and bootloader will try to boot the operating system, and then it will run. But if you interrupt the process, for example, you find out a way to make the bootloader to not load the operating system, it will automatically go to some kind of rescue mode. And from the rescue mode, you may be able to dump the contents of flash memory. So for this board, because it is using the SOC from Broadcom, so the vendor has actually included a very useful message. We can use the message to slowly dump off the contents from the flash memory using this command. However, because we're using serial port, the speed is around 1 kilobyte per second. It is quite impossible to dump the full 2 gigabyte flash. So how do we proceed? Well, for this scenario, we can focus only on the data we are interested in. For example, we can only extract the root file system. So we reduce the 23 days into 1.3 days, and after some efforts, we finally got a root file system. But when you are trying to attack a board, it will be very useful to also get some insights into the runtime environment of a modem. How do we do that? Well, first, we obviously found the password in the configuration process, which will make us be able to overcome this restricted shell after logon. So by using the information from the config file, we can get into a restricted shell. But the problem is that shell only has so many commands. We cannot really do anything. How do we get past this? So we do a grid shell heist. How does this kind of board boots? From the boot time of the kernel, it will log the initialization process. And for this board, the initialization process is BCM boot launcher start. It will run all of the scripts. And in one of the scripts, it will tell the board to start something called console D, which is similar to the bin logging on most Linux bosses. But, however, we're thinking that whether if we can write another new firmware onto the board, and this is how it should be done. So if we were to modify this file and change console D into something else, and repack the firmware and refresh the firmware onto the board, and we may be able to get a shell right. So in this case, we have succeeded in doing so. So we have successfully hijacked the boot process and we got a shell. But however, after some thinking that we think this process is not for everyone and it is too hardcore. So is there any easier way to do so? So we hired the help from Madam Maintain, which happens to be IDA Pro. We unlocked the secrets on how the command line is handled. So it seems like some of the commands will directly be handled as a shell command. But the problem is they did such terrible job in writing their software. So basically everything you write in, for example, if you write pin something else, then it will put your input in sh-c %s, which is automatically a string format vulnerability. So you can do effectively, well, command injection everywhere. I call this cat fuzzing because initially I found this by typing random inputs in the shell of the modem. But, well, cat sitting on keyboards has random inputs, so we can call it fuzzing. So, anyway, we have found multiple command injections on the modem, but note that these command injections are post-authorization. So, we have to find a way to use it later. But anyway, we found a way to break the modems locally, so we can declare this modem as one enemy failed, but we can only do so on the LAN side. So how do we do this on the remote side? Now we have a cinder, so we should see the spark to light it. When analyzing the dumps from the modem, it seems like there are some weird firewall rules on the modem. It seems a bit strange, so we take a little look. And some of the ranges are from public IP. So I don't know why, but Shodan can tell me what's inside those public IP ranges. Unfortunately, I have to block the IP ranges for the safety of the ISP. Well, but for some IP ranges, there are some weird devices inside. I do not know why the ISP will put those devices in there, but there are some two devices in the IP range, and one is FortiGate using a very low version of it. And another one is of our interest is an DVR, which is the device that you will connect it to multiple video cameras. And my favorite part is the vendor says the model is from 10 years ago, so they will not fix the bugs. So that's why we're here. And for DVR, well, how do you get a firmware? You do a Google search on their site, and they will lead you to a link, a very fishy link on mega.nz, and you will get their firmware. So you can extract the files from the firmware and start finding vulnerabilities inside. But how about that DVR they put on the public internet? Well, for that one, you can actually get an management interface, but how to get in? You do an admin. So in the real attack scenarios, well, any post-authentication RCEs become pre-auth because you only need to use admin to get in. And playing around in the management interface, it seems like the API requests are a little bit fishy. So as a natural-born hacker myself, it's natural to try something funny. But on the safe side, we again asked the help from Matt and Mainton. And it seems like how they design their programs are a bit fishy. So because the device actually implements some custom template languages, it is possible to use that command injection to write a file containing their scripting languages to do a remote code execution. So you send a request to the device, and you can then execute that file by opening it up in the browser. So you now have a high privilege remote code execution on the DVR. So that makes another enemy fail. So how do we light the fire? We now have the cinder and the spark. So this page is quite undisturbing for some. So during the research, I have done a quick test against the DVR on the ISP site. It seems like that I can reach all the modems by becoming an ISP. So how the firewall rules are laid out on the modems? It is designed that only IPs in the allow list can ICMP pin the modems, but also the same rules applies to HTTP and HTTPS. So therefore, by being able to pin the modems, I can reach the management interface of the modem. But that leaves one question. The place we found command injections requires a password. So how do we find the password? We need to somehow conjure up the passwords. So by doing some Google researching, it seems like the password rule is somehow fixed. Thus, the password rule is actually published on the internet, so it is not private information anymore. The password rule is basically some model name as a prefix added with the MAC address of the first network interface on the modem. But the device has shared credentials, which allows you to configure Wi-Fi. And by doing some elementary school level math, you can know that MAC address. So by combining those informations, you can effectively log in into every modem remotely and solve this problem. So by doing so, we can compromise devices in ISP's network and become the ISP, then to be able to compromise any modems because we can enumerate the admin credentials remotely. So therefore, we can RCE every modems. Well, that sounds some disaster, right? So by doing this, obviously that we can do a full control of a modem from the internet. We can maybe hijack a sniff network traffic from every modem, can use as a proxy or make it become a botnet. But I think the most terrible part of it is that you can gain persistence using this attack. The reason is the modem does not validate firmware images at all. So it is actually possible to backdoor every modem. Sorry for the image. However, we think it's on the vendor to design another device with proper firmware validation and secure boot. So that is how you will go and compromise an entire nation's network. You can go try to hack one modem and try to hack the telecom, and therefore you can try hacking everyone's modem. And you will yield a million of devices that you can use for anything. So after the research, we have come to a conclusion that we think everything is twisted and out of hope. First, I have to say, you do not need anything like this. You only need command injections. And it seems like the modems are quite like the IoT cameras. So this research, we found out some issues that we think the same set of mistakes can actually happen to all ISPs because there's not only one ISP that could be able to make such mistakes. So, and there's another problem, like systematic risk is unable to be assigned as a CVE. So, for example, the issues with the allowed list is not being able to assign as a CVE. So you have to be extra careful with that. And I have to say that a few key difficulties during the research, except pick and obtain the device and writing the reports, because I hate writing the reports, is to do vulnerability reporting. The problem with this research is that our bugs seem to be able to nuke everyone, and the bugs are similarly to be able to be weaponized, and it's also trivial to exploit, and we don't know anyone had exploited it yet. So we have to be extra careful while reporting the vulnerability. And it seems like in some cases that civil vulnerability programs could be a risk of leaks. This is because usually in the state-run programs, they are all run by public officials and they are sworn to not leak your data. And for some countries, they do not have national run certs. So we will highly recommend for all countries to check whether they have an official cert and is run by someone is clean. And it is very important for this cert to be open to anyone and also to be able to enforce policy. The problem with enforcing policy is that in some cases, a vendor is actually very critical and you should be able to force the vendor into fixing it, otherwise it will harm your country's safety. So we think in the current world of internet, it is quite opaque. You cannot predict how your enemies will react, but we can take one example. So, for example, that if you have two very large nations that they are already trying to go into war, and if for some cases that you happen to have lots of modems that are vulnerable and you have one central ISP, and if your neighboring countries decided to bomb you one day, and they decide to launch missiles at you, what will happen? The problem is that by taking out telecommunications, one, apparently that you cannot get a call for help while being bombed. That is terrible. and you cannot send money for weapons to bomb them back. And you also cannot call ambulance, cannot mobilize troops. So it is very critical for any nations should their telecommunication being taken over. And I think it is also very difficult for ISPs to defend against such issues. Why? Because one, the ISP's infrastructure is very complex, which we did not show on the graph, but we know that it is very complex. And for the GPON side, there can be very many models of IoT, and you cannot reliably detect every models of IoT whether they are vulnerable or not. And the problem is with the modems, there can be many models of the modems. So it could be very difficult for the ISPs to detect whether all of their equipments are safe. But we can make some serious suggestions to either the vendors or the ISPs or whatever else. First is the importance of defense in depth, that you should always apply network monitoring because you can catch unusual network traffic in the infrastructure. For example, your IoT should not be reaching outside network for most of the time. And you should also perform audits and perform a comprehensive audit, not the audit that you think it is an audit. And we call for the vendors to modernize all of their end-user networking devices. And most importantly, that vendors should assume that there is always someone out there trying to break into your device. So I think that is the most important one. Well, that will conclude my talk. So feel free to reach out from me on either of the ways. And I want to give special thanks to these people. And this is the actual cat I use for fuzzing. So thank you.
Thank you so much for all those technical breakdowns, but also for the words of wisdom. Let's take questions. We have a nice cluster here. The mic is coming to you.
Hi. Hi. Great talk. I just had one question regarding the UBIFS writing exploit, the file system writing exploit to get root on the ONT. Is there a reason why you didn't change the init variables from the kernel, for the kernel from the U-boot prompt?
No. So for this kernel, there are multiple ways to indicate an initialization process. And for this, it has hard-coded the initialization process to that program, so you cannot change the IT parameters.
Thanks.
Okay, on to the next one. Please keep your hands up so we can see you.
Hi.
Okay.
Great talk. I have a very simple question. It feels like replacing 4 million modems is a very costly and difficult undertaking. So how did they fix this, or did they fix this? Or thank you.
So because from what I said, the vendor does not have a centralized remote management protocol, so they have to basically connect into every modem and update the modem and try to hope that user is not using the modem at the same time.
So that sounds like fun. Okay, one more question. Let's hear Joey here, and then.
Hi, great talk. I have a question about what exactly the fixing the bugs looked like, because you found a number of 0 days, but frankly, there's probably much more 0 days in these routers, given that they simply have shell injections. But you've also pointed out some systematic risk of bugs being enabled, of being able to access things from internet IP addresses. Did they fix or address any of the larger issues, or just closing the individual shell injections that you happen to find?
Well, I think that would be up to the ISPs to whether to implement, for example, some certain network connected device certification or whatever. So, for example, maybe ISPs need to be very careful and hire some in-house people to, how do I put it, supervise on how the developers are writing their codes. So I don't have a real answer for that because you will always find 0 days. The best way I can say is you should try to build your network to be resilient. So in case of 0 days, that you will not fall down in one swoop.